Got late. This is chapter 12, January 9th, 2003. At sunrise on January 9th, police dispatched divers to the Berkeley Marina to take a closer look at what they believed to be a silhouette of a human body. As Grogan waited for word from the dive teams, he was advised that Scott had taken the white Chevy rental truck and was on Highway 132, heading in the direction of the marina. Scott had loaded a black suitcase into the rental's cab and a white one into the bed of the truck. By 10:30 a.m., he was pulling into the marina's yacht club. He drove to the end of the road where the road circled around. Peterson slowly drove around the circle as he looked at the water. The surveillance report read, "Once around the circle, Peterson turned into the parking lot and drove around the parking lot twice." At 10:44, officers reported that Scott exited the marina and drove to the San Luis Reservoir, where he entered the parking lot for O'Neill Forebay. He circled the lot for several minutes, and then he left the parking area, traveling east on Interstate 580. Peterson was utilizing counter-surveillance driving when he left the San Luis Reservoir area. The surveillance report stated, "Since Peterson's vehicle was equipped with the tracking device, surveillance units backed way off, allowing Peterson to drive into parking lots, to make U-turns for no reason, stop on the side of the road, and eventually end up at the DoubleTree in Bakersfield." All of Peterson's erratic driving was captured and stored in a tracking device. The surveillance officer reported that he next trailed Peterson to the South Central Valley near Fresno. The officer verified that Amber Fry was not at her massage therapy center nearby. Scott returned to Bakersfield, where he checked into a DoubleTree motel and stayed the night. Cell phone records indicated that he was at a motel. Profiler Sharon Hagen wrote in a criminal investigative analysis, "He didn't answer incoming calls and let them be transferred to his voicemail." This behavior was inconsistent with his habit of frequent cell phone use. That evening, Grogan telephoned Sharon Rocha and Lee Peterson to advise them that search teams had viewed an image that appeared consistent with the human body in the San Francisco Bay. He told both sets of parents that a team of divers would conduct a search on Saturday, January 11th. A dive team had attempted to view the object earlier that morning, but weather conditions had prohibited the underwater search, he said. Grogan also explained that if the object did turn out to be a body, it might not be Lacey. He warned them against believing any news reports they heard, advising them to wait until police contacted them. The detective later reported that neither Lee nor Sharon believed the discovery was Lacey. "Have you informed Scott?" Lee Peterson asked Grogan. The detective replied that he hadn't, but said that he would call Scott to let him know. According to friends and family, Scott had hoped that going out into the world and doing something would make it easier to deal with Lacey's disappearance. By the morning, on January 10th, TV trucks encircled the area of the bay where police teams were working. As officers worked an underwater grid with sonar devices, Scott was at the Enterprise rental office in Modesto, exchanging the white truck he had been driving for a silver Saturn. Police weren't prepared for this latest change. Scott's new car had no tracking device. Scott was still driving the silver car when he left home on the morning of January 11th. He checked the undercarriage of Lacey's Land Rover before leaving his house, apparently looking for a tracking device. Police observed that Scott was carrying a duffel bag and he had stopped at the bank, possibly withdrawing money. From there, he drove to the Red Lion and remained there for about 30 minutes. Once he emerged, he began using counter-surveillance tactics on members of the team. One of his maneuvers was to come to a sudden halt on the freeway, forcing officers in pursuit to pass him. At one point, after leaving the highway, he approached a member of the team who had turned off at a cul-de-sac in Modesto. When Scott got out of his car and began to walk toward her, the officer reported she drove off quickly. Based on Scott's behavior, Grogan ordered that the supervisor of the visual surveillance to seize the covert operation. From that point on, police kept tabs on him by monitoring the wiretap on both his cell phones. The police had since obtained a new warrant expanding upon the wiretap beyond Amber's calls to include 65 other individuals. Most were family and friends, but the list also included a number of high-profile members of the media, including Greta Van Susteren, Diane Sawyer, Matt Lauer, John Walsh, Gloria Gomez, Dan Abrams, Larry King, and Rita Cosby. Had any of those figures known that they were being recorded, of course, they would have been furious. I'm surprised that not one of them raised any objections when they found out. I know for a fact that some of them tried to get copies of the transcripts of their calls, but they were never turned over by police. Ultimately, however, the officers had court authority to do so, and the media was fair game. Throughout the day, officers were monitoring the wire on Scott's cellular phone updated me. Grogan wrote in his report, Scott told his friend that he was in Bakersfield to verify that he was not at or near Bakersfield at the time based on his cell site. Even as he was stringing the cops along, Scott was apparently still up to his old manipulative tricks with his family and friends. Scott acted as though he was crying in one of the telephone conversations, and then in the next he behaved completely normally when the telephone calls were separated only by a few moments, the detective noted. Later in the afternoon, Grogan reported, we were informed that the dive team in the San Francisco Bay had identified the object on the sonar, and a dive team determined that it was a boat anchor. The news traveled fast. Within a few moments, we were informed that Scott received a phone call from a cellular phone number associated with Lacey's mother, Sharon Rocha, where a female voice informed Scott that officers in that area had found a boat anchor rather than a body. Hi, Scott, this is Mom, Sharon's message began. It's about 1:45. Just wanted you to know that I just got a call from Ron Cloward, who is the boat Marina, and it is a boat anchor. Of course, we knew it wasn't Lacey, but I just wanted you to know. Listening to the message, Scott broke into a loud whistle. To the agent listening in, the whistle sounded like a sigh of relief. That afternoon, Scott spoke to his father, telling him that he was in Bakersfield when in fact he was in Gilroy, some 200 miles away. He also spoke to Mr. Guy, telling him that he had gone back to work believing that going and doing something would make it easier to cope. God, yeah, I couldn't imagine, Mr. Guy concurred. And then, now all the suspicion, man. Did you see all the people at the marina? Scott asked. Mr. Guy said he'd heard about the crowd. Scott said he'd received a call from the Modesto police chief informing him that the object in the bay turned out to be a boat anchor. Scott laughed. They had 88 people out there, you know, and they came up with an anchor. Maybe they will send 88 people somewhere else to start looking. I don't know. Scott was campaigning among his friends, but to what effect? Did he hope that they would relay his reservations to law enforcement? If the community thought that the police were on the wrong track, would the police really change their tactics? It was probably wishful thinking. Scott ended the conversation abruptly. All right, man, I gotta go, or I'm going to have to pull over here, he told Mr. Guy, suggesting that he might be about to cry. Scott's display of emotion didn't last long. Within 4 minutes, he was back on the phone, leaving a message for his friend Mike. His tone was upbeat, and the officers listening in detected no signs of sadness in his voice. Sunday was a quiet day for the investigators, but Monday, January 13th, brought a twist in the case and that forced investigators to become more circumspect in their dealings with Amber Frey. When Detective Bueller reported for duty on Monday, he had a 30-minute phone conversation on Sunday evening. The records also indicated that Amber had received a 2-minute call from Scott earlier that day, but Amber had not recorded these calls. For reasons police could only speculate on, Amber mentioned neither conversation when Bueller reached her that afternoon. Since she'd first called the police on December 30th, Amber was staying with Doug Sibley, her friend Sean's uncle. Now she told Bueller she wanted to move back to her own house in Madera. Bueller interrupted Amber's request as an attempt to maintain her privacy and to ensure that Doug would not overhear her phone conversations with Scott. Bueller noted it also matched up with her apparent lack of concern of a violent attack as she continued to stay at her residence through Tuesday night, 1/13. It appeared possible that Amber Frey is attempting to maintain contact with Peterson in the event he is not involved in the disappearance of his wife, Bueller wrote. At this time, it is unknown if she is making more contact with Peterson or if she is cooperating with this investigation and possibly giving him information. That same day, Grogan was advised that the National Enquirer intended to run a story in the upcoming issue. Scheduled to hit the newsstands on Thursday, January 16th, that could blow Amber's cover. The police didn't know much information that the paper had. They knew that the article would likely include unspecified details about a girlfriend, quite possibly from the Fresno area, along with some restricted information about evidence that would appear in print. The physical evidence included, but was not limited to, concrete anchors that were made and had been discovered during the investigation. Detectives discussed the positives and negatives of releasing information about the affair to the family of the suspected murder victim, Laci Peterson. During the meeting, Grogan received a call from Scott's lawyer. McAllister was angry that the detectives had been speaking with his client, knowing that Scott had secured counsel. Grogan informed McAllister that he was not in violation of any law. Scott was not in custody, nor did he file any complaints. The lawyer said that his concerns were ethical ones. Grogan said his concern was for Amber Frey's safety, and he wanted Scott to know that the police knew about her. Still unaware of either her son-in-law's relationship with Amber Frey or the impending Enquirer article, Sharon Rocha appeared on live television that evening, telling viewers that she stood firmly behind Scott. Sharon Rocha, Ron Gratzky, Lee Peterson, Amy Rocha, and the Modesto Police Chief Roy Wasden were all Larry King's guests that night. Also appearing as a commentator was defense lawyer Mark Garagos, who was not yet representing Scott. When King asked how Scott was holding up, Lee said that his son was devastated and that he was terribly distraught. He'd lost a lot of weight. I've never seen him so sad. He's just what you'd expect from somebody who is missing their wife and baby. He told the audience that Scott and Laci were a wonderful couple, just very devoted in everything together. They had such a marvelous life. They had a home they bought 2 years ago that they had been remodeling, and, well, a baby was coming, and they gardened. They did everything together. Laci's mother seconded Lee's portrait of Scott and Laci's happy marriage. They were just truly in love with each other. They're partners, they're a team, and they love each other. They planned together, they played together, they're always smiling. They're just very happy, a well-adjusted couple. Never been any indication. I never heard Laci say that she was even angry at Scott for any reason at all. We have to question in our minds about Scott. He's part of our family. Oh, we have no questions in our mind about Scott. He's part of our family, Amy Rocha added. One of the things that did come up, Lee, is why Scott didn't appear for the interviews. King said, "Do you know why?" "Yes," Lee began. "Well, he's very emotional. He would break down. He wouldn't be able to finish an interview, and he doesn't want the media to focus on him. He wants it on having Lacey's picture in front of the nation, so that someone may report something and we can get her back into our family." Then King asked Chief Wasden to comment on why Scott was still under suspicion, why the family on both sides stand by him. "We don't speculate in public, and we won't speculate in the media. We will follow through on that," Wasden replied. At this point in time, Scott has not been eliminated from the investigation. When Detective Grogan reported for work on Wednesday, January 14th, he was alerted to yet another unreported phone call between Scott and Amber that was picked up the night before. Unbeknownst to Amber, police were now tapping her phone as well as Scott's. As it was apparent by listening to this recording of their conversation that Amber may not have told Scott Peterson that she had made contact with the detectives from the Modesto Police Department, Grogan wrote in his report. Amber and Scott had also communicated by telephone on Sunday, 1/12/2003, and due to technical problems with the wire, we were not aware of what was said. Investigators met to continue their discussion about Amber's wiretaps, as well as their concerns about the upcoming article in the Enquirer, because the information that was coming out in the National Enquirer quite possibly would include Amber Frye's name and possibly other details about her that we could not possibly know at that time. It was believed necessary to inform the family of her identity, Bueller wrote in his report. There are computer-generated reprints of one of the photographs of Amber and Scott together on 12/14/2002. During the evening of the formal gala they had attended, that we could not be certain were retrieved from the family, friends, and clients of Amber Frye. For this reason, along with not wanting the family to be caught without this knowledge, it was agreed to inform them of this information, Bueller noted. That afternoon, Grogan contacted Scott on the cell phone he had used to talk to Amber Frye. Scott picked it up right away. Grogan could hear voices in the background. "Are you by yourself?" he asked. "Yeah, what's up?" Scott asked. "That photograph I showed you of the girl." "Okay, should we be discussing this, or is Kirk gonna call me up again and say that it's inappropriate?" "Well, I guess that's up to you to make that decision," Grogan advised. "He told me it's a dictatorship not to talk to anyone, unfortunately." "Okay, I just wanted you to know I know who that is." Grogan was referring to the woman in the picture. "I know it's Amber, and I wanted to give you the opportunity maybe to talk to me about that." "Okay, well, I appreciate the call. I'm glad I've listened to Kirk, though, but yeah, we can't," Scott sighed loudly, "have any discussions. I just wanted you to know that I'm not going to the media about this or anything. That's not happening, but I wanted you to know that I know she's out there, and I wanted you to see if you would explain it." Scott interrupted the detective mid-sentence. "Yeah, I just, really shouldn't talk, so." "Well, then that's fine, but you're gonna see me on Larry King talking about it, okay?" "All right. I mean, is there going to be other Ambers out there, Scott?" "What's that?" Scott was acting as though he couldn't hear the detective, just as he did whenever Amber asked him a difficult question. "Are there other people out there, Scott? Other Ambers?" Grogan repeated. "Other press people, or?" Scott asked at the same time. "Well, I'm talking about other gals," Grogan clarified. "Maybe we shouldn't be talking about," Scott started. Grogan asked Scott if his low-key attitude with the press and his hesitancy to become involved in interviews had something to do with the fact that there were females like Amber who would have been seen with him. Instead of answering, Scott told Grogan that he'd discuss the matter with his attorney, and if McAllister agreed, he would set up a meeting. The phone call ended. Scott also spoke to his dad that day. His mom had already left him a message telling him that she was putting a check in the mail for his expenses. "I got an envelope already and we're gonna be here," Jackie Peterson said in the message. "So the mailman hasn't come yet. Give me a call. Love you. Bye." When Scott returned her call, he got Lee on the line. "Okay, how much do you need?" his dad asked. "I don't know, not much," Scott asked him. "A couple grand?" "Yeah, that would be fine," Scott said. "We'll put 5 in there just for the hell of it," Lee Peterson said. "Oh, great, yeah, pay some bills," Scott stated. "Where are you?" "I'm going to work out for a few minutes here at the club," Scott said. Good, his dad responded. "I told Mom how great your club is." "Relax a little bit," Scott said, "and I don't know if I'm pulling an OJ by being at the club or not, but..." Scott was referring to O.J. Simpson's claim that he was searching for his wife's real killer when he had been actually playing golf. "I wouldn't worry about that," Lee Peterson said. Once again, Scott's parents were reinforcing the kind of anything-goes behavior Scott had showed throughout his adult life. "Go ahead, hang out at the country club while your wife is missing. You had an affair? Don't worry about it. You can do no wrong. And by the way, we'll take care of your bills." In fact, to the police, it didn't look like Scott was worried about much of anything. Just days after he'd called to get the Playboy channel added to his cable system, he had called to replace it with a seriously hardcore porn package, including 10 and ecstasy sex channels. Interestingly, Scott's half-sister, Ann Bird, learned Scott's ordered the upgrade on January 12, 2003, the very day that he'd attended her son's christening. When the subject came up later with the priest, he couldn't resist a moment of dark humor. "Must have been some service, huh?" Officers monitoring Scott's calls made some notes of their own in the newspapers. During one call, a college buddy told Scott that the newspapers had been brutal to him. "The reporters were not his friends," Scott replied. "They can make me the biggest villain in the world if they keep covering it." As the monitoring officer noted, Scott's comment seemed like one you'd expect from a criminal and not a husband concerned about the desperate search for his missing wife. In this period, Scott also called Sergeant Ron Cloward to ask if the officers had any directions for him. Cloward responded that there would be times when the police did things that people did not agree with. In some instances, he explained, they might even make Scott or his parents angry. "Right," Scott replied during the call. He did not appear to be affected by the comment, but later conversations would reveal a different attitude. Scott ended the dialogue by asking the sergeant to call him if there were anywhere else he could look for Lacey. It was as if Scott had suddenly grown anxious to convenience the police and that he was interested in helping in his wife's case. In stark contrast to another call Scott placed to his parents' home, this time Scott's brother Joe answered the phone. "The media is trying to make me feel bad," Scott told him. Of course, it's clear why the protest of all this attention had been a burden for Scott. He couldn't appear before the media because he knew the scrutiny could only do him harm. Scott's obsession with the media may seem to have bordered on the histrionic, but in hindsight, it's clear that it was just another of his self-preservation instincts. Scott told his brother that he had just received a call from Craig Grogan. "He knows that I don't take his calls because his caller ID is blocked, and he calls me from a different phone line. I don't know where he's calling from, but I can hear cars in the background, so I answer it. He's just throwing out all this shit just for me to talk. What's he talking about? They're just searching for something. They're trying hard. My attorney said yesterday they have such a hard-on for pinning the case on you. Joe missed the allusion. He feels they may have a hard case on you. No, his expression was that they have a hard-on to make a case against me, but those cocksuckers, Scott continued. Grogan had tried to throw some bait out by getting him to talk about the headliner in his car, which needed to be fixed. So he throws things out here and there and says, I need to clear up a few things. Less than 8 hours before this call, Scott was asking Sergeant Cloward what more he could do to help in the investigation. I find it revealing that he would make such overtures to people at the top, including the mayor. But when it came to Brocchini and Grogan, Scott's true feelings were revealed by the choice of words he had for them in private. As Officer Jacobson would ask in one report, exactly what is Scott Peterson so worried about? Okay, I want to show you guys the new airport. It's so fancy. Also, Alaska had a power outage in their computer systems today for like 4.5, 5 hours. So the airport is technically super full. So right now we're upstairs at the Speakeasy. And this is our my arrivals. Sorry. This is where everyone comes in. Look at it. And then over there we got TSA. But yeah, we got a whole forest inside now. It's beautiful. Feel free to stop by the airport. I will be here. Thank you for flying Delta.